That's a great question. It's a question we continue to ask. The the funding agreements that the federal government implements in transferring funds to First Nations schools has a provision that that used to explicitly say that in response for us giving these funds to the school should offer an education comparable to that provided in a provincial system. They've changed the terminology somewhat to say that the programs that are provided in a First Nations school should enable a student to transfer from that school to a provincial system without penalty. Really, it means the same thing. Our educators, our school administrators, the chiefs and councils ask, if this is what you're looking for, if you're looking for some comparability or equitability, why are the funds that you're providing not similar to those being provided in provincial systems? So you're asking a question that has yet to be answered. There are many ways to crunch the data, but we do know that taking the funds that were provided in 1996-97, you look at the total figures, the federal government decided to cap that amount. They said from here on in, we're only going to provide a maximum 2% increase every year. We know at the time our population was growing by a certain amount. Costs of teacher salaries and books and other materials in the system were rising by a certain amount, and we believe that a roughly 6.2% increase was required at the time. Well, here we are 20 years later, and there's still a 2% cap on First Nations education funding. The 6.2% never materialized. We believe that there could be a gap exceeding $2 billion now for First Nations education in Canada. It gets back to your question. Why does it exist? Why is there this gap? We think there's probably many reasons for that, but I don't know if there's any one answer. You also have to remember that First Nations education isn't the only thing that was capped in 96-97. Social programs were also capped. Funding for First Nations governments was capped. Funding for First Nations housing was capped, and funding for First Nations infrastructure operations and maintenance was also capped. So those caps on funding, those ceilings that were placed, are still in place 2 decades later. So you have a funding crisis generally that's been created for First Nations governments that really has a drastic effect on education.